So very, very good morning, everyone, and Happy New Year. This is the beginning of 2023, and welcome to this first of 3 teachings on generosity, how it is for bodhisattvas. And to those of you joining us later on online through YouTube, then a very good morning or good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are. And so it's nice to see one or two faces I know personally from the past, but who are new to these Saturday Zooms, and one or two people joining us for the first time that I don't know in real life. So I really hope the teachings pleasant and useful for you. Now, what we do, and I suppose I better go back to zero, although I say the same thing at the beginning of nearly every talk, is we need to start with the right motivation. Motivation, the word motive, means driving force. And so although it's something we do at the beginning of a teaching, what we're really setting in place is a driving force that should stay with us for the next hour and a half as we share and explore Lord Buddha's teaching. And that driving force, and especially for teachings on generosity, is one of as much loving care for everyone, all other beings, ourselves, as much loving care as we can muster. That's why we are learning here, because we care for ourselves and because we care for everyone. But human minds, being what they are, a little bit subject to distraction, let's say, then although we may be coming here through a very wonderful motivation, what we're trying to do is to keep first to find that very best quality, most powerful, loving care, to stimulate our minds to remember what the best love feels like, the best care for others feels like, and then to keep it going. And so we're looking in that motivation for 3 qualities. We want, first of all, a big mind. And a big mind means one that is big through inclusiveness. And because of interdependence, we are connected in this life with our family, friends, enemies, the people who have figured very strongly in our story in this life. But this isn't the first life, and somehow, although not quite so powerful, we are connected one way and another with many hundreds, thousands, millions of other beings. Impact is endless. And so we tried to tap into that connection, not just to feel like me sitting here in front of the phone or the computer, but to feel that I'm here on behalf of. And if I listen well and think well and receive well these teachings, that will benefit through osmosis all those other beings, and it will have an influence on this world in which we live for goodness, especially for generosity, because that is very, very much missing in our world. So we try to have a very, very big mind, feeling we're here for everyone. And then not just big, but a loving mind, so that each and every being we are including, we try and feel the very best love for, and especially those who've been unkind to us, those who've been harmful, destructive, awkward, who we might feel have messed up our lives, spoiled our lives. It's very, very important that we try to include them and to feel the utmost love for them who they essentially are, which is like all of us, a mind on its way to freedom and a mind carrying darkness of one sort or another. We're all like that. So we need a big mind and a loving mind, and then a very, very, very happy mind. I hope you're happy. We're happy because we've got Dharma. And although that word is, the more you think about it, the stranger it gets. I'm just checking I'm recording sometimes. Yes, I am. But we have Dharma. Dharma's forever. All the rest is temporary. Comes and goes. Some lives you're up, some lives you're down. Within one life, there are good years, bad years, lonely years, all sorts of things. All sorts of things. Dharma's forever. We found it. We found the keys to sorting things out once and for all, forever, in a very, very, very kind way for everyone. So we should be extremely happy about that. I hope you are. And if not, then we try and fake it when we make the motivation. So we really tell yourself, I'm really happy. I'm so happy I've got Dharma. You try and keep that going for the next hour and a half. Okay, so we'll do some prayers that really embody those three things. Sonje chodon soji chonamla jancho badwa dane chapsunje. Dagi jinso jipe sonamje. Drola penchara sonje drupara shu. Semchen tamche dewa dang dewe judang dempara juche. Dongal dang dongal ji judang tralwara juche. Dongal mepe dewa tampa dang men tralwara juche. Nyeren chadan ne tang tralwe. Tanyom chembola ne para jura che. Deyata shame shamawati shamata shatru kure mara jite karota ke ore tejowati Pollo yane bishuda nimale malapana ye kukure kaka grase grasana muki paramuki amuki shamme dawane sawa graha bandanane negri hetava Sava bhava pravadina vimukta marapasha savidva buddha mudra nukatita Sava mare putsarita parishuddhe bhiga shantu Sava mara kama. Palen sawe lama rinpoche Dagi chiwara pende denshula Kadren chempo gune jezonte Kuson tuji madrup sadhu sol. Thank you. So I thought to start today, not quite as we've been doing. Our topic is generosity. So I'd like to start just with a few minutes quiet, whereby you think very naturally what generosity means for you when you hear the word, if you hear somebody's been generous, just generally, nothing profound, nothing, just very simply, when you think of this topic, generosity. I think it's good we start there. Okay. So we're not going into deep peace, shamatha, disappearing into some deep space. You're just thinking. When I think generosity, when I read the word, when I hear somebody say, oh, he's a very generous person, or she is. Just generally, what does generosity mean for us? Thank you. So if I remember in a couple of weeks' time, when we come to the end of this course, then I'd like you to just think back to see if through these teachings, then you have a much clearer idea of what generosity is for Buddhists, what we mean by generosity, and then by the paramita of generosity. And if you've got some feel of what generosity is. I'd like to say a few words before launching into the topic about teachings. When we come through generosity, we'll see there are three types, and the third type is giving the gift of Dharma. And it's a strange thing. What can I give you? Is there an understanding of generosity that's something like a baseball ball I've got, and I can, like that, and you can catch it, and then now you understand generosity? Or any teaching, what's going on when there's the teaching and when there is the gift of Dharma? I can't teach you generosity. I can only invite you to explore fields that will awaken more understanding of generosity in you. Teachings are an invitation. If they stay on this level, me going blah, 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 concept, 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 and you sitting there registering concept, 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 this one, that one, fit them together, got it, finished, not much will happen. I had an image in my mind this morning. Some of you who know me know that from time to time I have fun with Tibetan language. And in particular, there's one word in Tibetan that always tickles me, and it's the word for light. And I think some of you might remember. The Tibetan word for light is It makes me think of like the first words of language that ever came to human beings, that looking at the morning sun, like this, right? So this morning, in my weird imagination, I imagined cave people. So in the darkness of their cave, huddled around their fire in the morning, and the first one who's been outside comes back in and wants to tell them, come out and look, because it's beautiful sunrise, or maybe even there's a rainbow in the sky. And so he comes in and he says, oh, like this. And they all know action is required. And so they get out from under their bear skin or their dinosaur skin or whatever they were wearing. Sorry, no dinosaurs, a ton of humans. Great mammoth skins. And they come outside to look at the what language can do is an invitation. But those people need to get out and go outside and witness it for themselves. They need the living experience. So we'll go through a lot of ideas together. It's a beginning. It's only a beginning. And only you can make these so-called teachings into real teachings, because in this duality that we are, I'm only a teacher if you learn. If you don't learn, I'm not a teacher. I'm somebody talking into a screen. I'm a talker. A talker becomes a teacher when you learn. So you need to bring these things to life. I don't know if they still exist, but I remember when I was young, there were things, packet soups, dehydrated soups, Maggi and other brands. And you put it in water and it kind of expands and expands and becomes something edible, I suppose. It's maybe not so good as to make your own soup, but it's kind of magic. So Dharma teachings, many teach, not just me. They give you the packet soup, you've got the powder. But unless you put it in water, it's not going to expand into what it really is. And it's not going to nourish you. So please do understand that. Teachings, when you receive teachings, you receive a beginning, you receive words, you receive concepts. But then as you bring these words to life through giving them your time, your energy, your reflection, and so on, then they become teachings, because you are learning and you are growing. So we have 3 weeks together on this topic of generosity. And we might not, there's a support document. I think most of you have got it. If you haven't got it, then email and we'll send it to you. But you'll see in there, we'll be looking at the nuts and bolts, the very basics of the Buddha's teachings on generosity that are the same for all Buddhists, whether you're Theravada, Zen, Mahayana, it doesn't matter. There'll be the same teachings about what are we giving, what is giving, how to do it, who to give it to, what's the right time, and so on and so on. It's very basic need to know. That's mainly what we're doing today, going through Gampopa's teachings on the paramita of generosity. Next week, then we'll be looking much more at the Bodhisattva mind and why they are practicing generosity and how they are practicing generosity and what makes it so special. What makes it a key component of enlightenment. And then in a fortnight's time, we'll be looking at how those bodhisattvas who are practicing Vajrayana Buddhism, Tantra, how they have special methods that accelerate our development of generosity. So we need to have done next week's talk about what's the essence of Bodhisattva generosity, to understand how Vajrayana methods actually make that more effective. So today is, how can you say, it's a much more technical day. We just need to go through so many facts and ideas, so we've got the basics of generosity right. Of course, I think most people, I can't say everybody, will think that generosity is a good thing. I'm sure if you're here, you think generosity is a good thing, for sure. But maybe there are people who have no interest in it at all and think it's just stupid people who are generous. And anyway, we think it's a good thing. And we assume that, in the past, Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, they've practiced generosity. It's basically part of goodness. Now, from that point of view, it's part of what is called Dharma, but not Buddha Dharma. Dharma, there's something called universal Dharma, which is not linked to the Buddha's teachings in particular, but to what is generally perceived as true by human beings. What's perceived as good by human beings. So hurting each other, not good. Helping each other, good. We tend to respect someone who's kind and helpful and generous. We think of that person as a good person. We think of the quality of generosity as something that one needs to develop. If one's a Christian, in which case it's caritas, which becomes charity in English. It's our love of our fellow beings that causes us to be generous, and so on. So there's universal Dharma. Generosity is a good thing. And then if we come into Buddha Dharma, then we have generosity is a good quality. And in basic Dharma, it is central to making good karma. You know that the teachings on karma, cause and effect, are the very heart of the Buddha's teaching. And that we believe in many lives and reincarnation. However we believe in it, even if you have the deepest Mahamudra, Dzogchen, Shunyata understanding, still we believe in many lives and reincarnation. It's just we realize how they are, how dreamlike they are, and so on. But that's the heart of the Buddha's teaching. Karma, cause and effect. If you make positive, helpful karma, the result is good for you. You will feel good. You will be a happy person. You will have harmonious circumstances in your life, of friends and enough wealth, and so on, good health. If we make harmful karma, then of course, that's what causes us to be uncomfortable inside and to meet disharmony, unfavorable circumstances on the outside. So at the very heart of good karma is the practice of generosity. And it's said in many places, and many of my teachers have taught me that Buddha taught generosity first and foremost. And then maybe this week, but certainly next week, when we're looking at the 6 paramita that take us to enlightenment, then we can see all 6 as simply being a development of generosity. This is where I can give you the packet soup powder and you need to think about it. What are you really doing if you're a Buddhist? And if you see beyond the tralala, of course you're a Buddhist, you go to Dharma centers, you do prayers of certain sorts and practices and meditation, but behind all of that fabric, that structure, what are you really doing to yourself? What are you doing to your mind? What are you doing with your life? How are you changing? Do you think there is a need for change? Why? And then if you are going to change, how? And then if you look at all of that, if you see what you're going to do, you've got 6 parameters, okay, of practice. Number 2, ethics, morals, right conduct. But you can't just sit down and write conduct. If I say, okay, now let's do 1 minute right conduct, what are you going to do? I want you to be ethical for a minute. What are you going to do? You can only be ethical in the way you give yourself to others, the way you are practicing generosity. The whole Bodhisattva path is one of dedicating yourself to everyone's welfare. It's a gift. So number 2 paramita is about how you do it. And then forbearance, number 3, is how do you put up with all the problems that come when you're trying to be helpful and beneficial and trying to be a bodhisattva. You can't just sit down and be forbearing. You have to forbear something. And if you think about it, what are you forbearing? You're forbearing the difficulties of relationships with other people and life and your own body and so on. It's about generosity. So all the parameters are about generosity. So in the basic Buddhist teachings, we can call them the Shravaka level of teachings or Hinayana teachings, whichever words you're used to, then mainly we're looking at generosity as essential to making the good karma, turning round our stream of consciousness so that what flows in it into the future is better and better through a generous mind. We'll be looking at that on the basics for all Buddhists. But then when we come to the Mahayana teachings, we'll see that implicit to the practice of generosity is an understanding of the compassion and ego balance and how we're shifting that away from self-centeredness and more towards compassion. But as we're shifting towards compassion away from self-centeredness, an understanding of the voidness of it all. Everything is very important, not voidness as nihilism, but voidness as the impermanent, ever-changing play of interdependence. That's what will get us enlightened, which is what bodhisattvas want to do, become Buddhas to help everybody. So we'll be looking at that. And in order to look at that, I think first we need to think, explore, when you're in between things, when you're walking around, when you're doing something mechanical, like boiling a kettle, making a cup of tea, and so on, when you've got spare mind time to think, then we do need to think, what is wealth? What's generosity? Huh? Generosity means you move wealth, right? Basically, what does being generous mean? Moving wealth around so it's more helpful. Sort of. So then what's wealth? What is a rich human being? We need to think about that with all the, we all know it in a way. We've all seen it on social media. It's a cliche now. It wasn't when I was young. There are so many things now you've heard too many times that were rare pieces of knowledge when I was young. It was kind of wisdom, real wisdom, rare wisdom from the East, from the ancient teachings in the West from wherever it was. Nowadays, you see it 50 times a day on Facebook, and everyone's read it too much, and it's a cliche. But nevertheless, those cliches are cliches because they're so true. It's like a person with next to nothing can feel wealthier than a billionaire. That's really true. You're wealthy when you're satisfied, when you feel I've got everything I could ever wish for, and even more than that. For this is it's too much. Gosh, you feel this funny English word, spoiled. And when you look at, when you spoil something, actually it means you ruin it, doesn't it? But then we say, I feel really spoiled. People come round, they make you a party, they give you something. You say, I feel so spoiled. And it's got absolutely the opposite meaning. Language is weird. But when you feel that life is so kind to you. Now, there are people who can feel that, who have next to nothing. And of course, yogis and Buddhist practitioners, that's what we are aiming for. First, we need to fake it a bit, but in the end, it becomes genuine. What is wealth? We need to think about that, because generosity is about how we use wealth and how we relate to wealth. So there's a kind of a preliminary practice of just thinking more generally about wealth and generosity. So anyway, let's start. And I'd like today to just simply work through Khenpoken's chapter. I realized at one point, nobody does it better than him. He was just so brilliant. He had everything going for him. So we've looked at his life in recent months. And so in a way, it makes it easier for a teacher like me. If I say what he said, then I'm doing my best. So if you're following, we're on page 4 of your support document, and we're in his teachings in the Ornament of Precious Liberation. And he says we're going to study generosity through 7 areas, 7 points. First, we're going to reflect on the fault of its absence and the benefit or the qualities of practicing generosity. Then after that, a list of 6 more things. Its essential character, its different aspects, the essential character of each aspect, how it can be increased, how it can be pure, and its consequences. So the first of those is what's wrong if we're not generous, what's wonderful if we are generous. He says a person lacking generosity will always suffer from poverty. Whatever poverty means, whatever poverty is, then the person will suffer from it. In terms of poverty, poverty is a result, cause and effect. So the cause of poverty is lack of generosity. So why aren't we generous? It's because we're mean, because we're afraid, because we're selfish, because we're greedy. And so we deprive others for our own benefit. Now that can become really nasty. Just this morning I was hearing from a friend whose ex-husband is being ripped off by his new wife. He's rather old and losing the plot, and she is stripping all of his assets and bank account and everything. And will get some short-term benefit. From a Buddhist point of view, she is ruining her own future. for the sake of the money and the flat and all the rest of it. Doing it through a mean, selfish mind, which is the case, and neglect for somebody who's in a delicate state of health and mind. Who knows? But it says if the causes are bad enough, the result can be that you're reborn as a ghost, a spirit, hungry ghost, deprived spirits. That's a strange rebirth, because in that rebirth, many of them actually don't have the discontinuity that we have, where we don't remember past lives. They remember what they did. They remember how their greed and theft and all those other things. I don't hear so much of them. I suppose they still happen, but at one point they were like armed robbers who would attack bank vans and just kill the people if they needed to get the money. Anyway, if the cause is strong enough and the motivation and the mind behind the cause is bleak and dark enough, then you can be reborn as a spirit, and you'll remember what you did, and you'll be aware of why you're suffering, how you're suffering, because of what you did. So it said, but even if you're reborn human, you will be poverty-stricken. That's why we do the preliminary reflection. Doesn't necessarily mean you'll be monetarily poor, or you'll be lacking in property and resources. It means you will feel poor. But then sometimes there are very tangible reasons for that. We see that on the media, people who have no food. No food. I remember being in countries in times of famine, and people so hungry, so thin, but they hear there's food to be had somewhere. And even though they're so tired and emaciated, they'll walk for 2 days in the hope of getting food. So sometimes there really are tangible circumstances where poverty, and like these days now, very, very real, with the changes in economics that are happening right now. There are mothers who can't feed their children, and so on. So sometimes poverty is very tangible. But more generally, what we're looking at is that you feel poor. Now, there are lots we'll see later on as we get through this chapter, that there are many levels of generosity, of giving of ourselves. It's not just about stuff. In a way, that's the least important. It's about giving of ourselves, so we can feel poor because we're materially poor, or we're emotionally poor. We don't have friends. We don't have people who care for us, and so on. There's an emotional, social, interactive poverty. And we can also be, on a much more inner Dharma level, poor, because it's very hard for us to meet, to receive, to digest, and to bring to life the Dharma teachings. So the result is poverty. In the text that we're following, it says there was somebody called Droshinje. He's in the scriptures. He was someone who had this bodhisattva. I think he was a bodhisattva, if not an arhat. He had the power to be aware of the deprived spirit realm. And he asked them, why? Why are they here? And they said, we ended up here because of miserliness, avariciousness, avarice. And then also what's wrong if we're not generous is we can't achieve Buddhahood ourselves, and we can't help others achieve Buddhahood. in the teachings of the Buddha nature, actually, and the paramitas, there's a very strange example. Of course, it's from a few thousand years ago. We can make some amazing examples these days. So much beautiful examples. But we could make, but then I have to stick to the text. So the text is based on a couple of 1,000-year-old examples. And it's the picture, it's about a king. And this king wants his portrait made. So there's no cameras. There are only artists who can paint. He's a strange king. He wants the best. So he's thinking, get me the artist who's the best at painting hands. And then get me the artist who's the best for faces. So in the end, he commissions 6 artists. And he gives them different bits of his body in canvas and paints and says, now go away and paint the bit that you've been commissioned to paint, and we'll put them all together at the end. Like I said, it's a strange example, but it's what's in the Buddha's teaching. And it says, so they all go off and they start painting the bits and pieces of him that they've taken their sketches. And it says, but then at one point, one of the artists goes off to another country and never comes back. And so the whole project is finished because the king is not going to put up a picture in his palace with a whole chunk missing. It just wouldn't work. So it says, like that, we need all 6 paramita to become Buddha, to help other beings. If there's no generosity, you will never become Buddha. And when you look at the reality of what are we talking about, becoming Buddha means having a perfect mind, nothing more. Nothing about, becoming something in a pure land and all of a sudden, poof, you're reborn and I'm a Buddha. It's about your mind. This mind that thinks in the way it does, that reacts in the way it does, that's full of all the stuff it's full of and empty of so much other stuff that's not there. This mind, we're going to make that a perfect mind. What is a perfect mind? So peaceful, nothing but kindness, no rough edges, no darkness, no harm is the most important thing. There's nothing in there that damages anybody, including yourself. So when we look at where does the damage, what's the most violent self-harm weapon inside us and that causes damage to others, it's self-centeredness and greed. So there's no way you're going to become Buddha without letting go of ego, without generosity. And as I said earlier, in fact, most of the 6 paramitas, the 6 artists' work, are based on generosity. And when you think about that more, which I hope you'll do, what's paramita number 6? Wisdom. Wisdom of voidness. With wisdom of voidness alone, you will not become Buddha. This is the bad news in a way, because you can master the teachings on prajna paramita, on voidness, shunyata. If you're bright, I think you could do that in a year easily. But you won't become Buddha. To become Buddha, you need so much in your own mind stream, in your being, from moment to moment, year to year, life to life. You need so much goodness, so much kindness, so much love. And you'll only learn that love by learning to let go your self-centeredness and to care more and more for others, to be given more and more to others. So it says, without it, we're looking at the faults of not being generous. Then you can't help yourself become Buddha, you can't help others. And then the opposite is that generous people will be happy, because through generosity, the karma is that we appreciate what we have. We feel so satisfied with what we have. That uncomfortable feeling of missing something. I think we've all got it. And if you don't, then I'm going to come and start taking teachings with you whereby there's a deep inner thing of something missing. Maybe. So anyway, that basic power of the karma of generosity will make you a happy person, happy, rounded, fulfilled person in future lives. And then through the power of karma, the way karma works, very complicated, but if you carry the karma to be reborn as a ghost, deprived spirit in one life, through practicing generosity in this life, you will take away that karma, close the door to that rebirth. This is very, very important. Generosity and the loving heart that's behind it will be our main tool in getting rid of other harmful feelings, emotions, tendencies, kleshas that we carry in us. So there are many, many benefits. And of course, in the end, generosity will take us to enlightenment. And this section about the drawbacks and the benefits, drawbacks of no generosity, benefits of being generous, ends with one of the most amazing quotes. I hope you spend good time with it. It says, it's from the Grahapati Ugra Paripricha Sutra, the sutra taught at the request of the son of Grahapati. It says, what I've given is mine. What I've given is mine. Huh? What I have hoarded is not mine. What has been given has purpose. What is hoarded is pointless. What has been given doesn't require protection. What is hoarded does. What has been given brings no more anxiety. Whatever is hoarded is accompanied by worries. What has been given shows us the way to Buddhahood. What is hoarded shows the very quick way to evil. Giving will bring great wealth, and hoarding will not. Giving will know no end of wealth. Hoarding will exhaust it. This, in terms of mainly material generosity, but also the other forms of generosity, is an amazing reflection. When it says, what I've given is mine, means if we give it in the right way, we make what you have has now been used to make good karma. And because you've given it, it's gone. But you've got the good karma. Now that good karma will stay in your mind stream. It will survive death, and it will come back in the next life in the form of bringing you wealth from the outside, a wealth of friendship, of material wealth, and so on. And on the inside, a feeling of fulfillment and satisfaction. So it's yours because in giving it, you've put something in yourself that's death-proof. What is hoarded is not yours, because at least when you die, if not before, like imagine it was just figures in the bank. This often shocks me. I think whatever money I've got in the bank, I have to turn it into stuff at least, because otherwise, what is it? You go online and you see numbers. I mean, what is wealth? Other than seeing numbers or getting it through the post on a piece of paper. As long as it's not used, what is it? And if you die tonight, it just becomes somebody else's illusion of numbers on paper, and I'm wealthy. I have striking moments in my life, so I often repeat them. Sorry for those who've heard it before. But once I was staying with a millionaire. I was actually there because the come-upper was staying with a millionaire, and I was come-upper's secretary. Very, very nice man, Bernie. And especially he got nicer and nicer, and he wrote beautiful children's books. He became a TV star in the US, reading his children's books. He looked the part. But in his earlier life, he was a very great inventor, part of the Xerox process, aeroplanes, and so on. He had a lot of money. But one day, he put his arm around my shoulder and he said, "Ken, you might not believe this, but you're richer than I am." Now, we were standing next to his castle in the Dordogne, looking at the garage where there were a couple of antique Rolls Royces, and his aeroplane was parked on a field, and so on and so on. And he said, "Ken, you might not believe this, but you're richer than I am." And he said, "Because on paper, currently, I'm in debt for £500,000, I think he said." So he said, "Just imagine that, you're £500,000 richer than I am." But actually, I was pretty much penniless at the time. And there he was with castle, aeroplane, Rolls Royces, and able to host the come-upper and a party of 20 people, and so on and so on. But on paper, so we think about that. It's amazing. What we have hoarded is just sitting there. We have this human illusion of it's mine, because somewhere people signed papers or typed in their PIN code or whatever that says, "No, that's Ken's, it's not mine." But while it's there, it's not doing anything, and we could die. And it never was used. But if we use it and give it, we place in our mind stream a wealth. Now, it says at the end of that quote, "We'll never know the end of wealth," because by being generous, we also make the mental karma of the habit of giving and using, and that can get better and better, and that will serve us as a great friend in our next life. We'll give more because we're a generous person, and we'll be making more good karma, and that will make us feel even more like being generous and making more karma. It's an opening up. Whereas the hoarding, of course, can go the other way, and we can just get more and more afraid of loss and hoarding and sitting there, going online 10 times a day just to check we've got all those zeros in the bank account. And then what we give has purpose. Our life had purpose because we helped somebody. There's nothing more purposeful than that, rather than having so-called resources or wealth parked somewhere. What we've given away doesn't require protection or repairing. Tell me about it. I've got 2 properties, smaller one in Scotland, one here. If you've had to maintain a property, if you've been burgled, which I have, and let me tell you about one burglary. My mother-in-law was a dentist. Her husband was a dentist. And in those days, gold was used a lot to fix teeth. So over a lifetime of dentistry, 2 practitioners, then there were lots of little bits of gold that were kept in an old tin biscuit box. About a kilo of gold. Now, if you know anything about the value of gold, you'll know that a kilo of gold is quite a lot. So that was tucked away on the floor somewhere. And I was away in Scotland doing Samhain Christmas course, I think. And the house was burgled. And the burglars found it in this rusty biscuit tin. So that was going to be a kind of nest egg for later on in life. Gone. So if we use our wealth to help others, we don't need to protect it. And then we don't need to service it. If you've got a car, you know, they're always breaking down. They need servicing, need new tires, and so on. So there's no anxiety, there's no work. More than anything, then it shows us the way to Buddhahood. So let's move on from there. I think you got the point. We need to be generous, and we need to avoid its opposite. Now, the next thing is the definition of generosity. Its essential character. It says generosity means giving with an unattached mind, giving that which has value. I hope what we'll discover, although I see time rocketing by, is that when ordinary people think of generosity, it's kind of a luxury, something we do from time to time. It's an extra, it's kind of like a medal. If you've had a day when you could be generous and help somebody, it's kind of, oh, I was generous today in that time, or somebody does one act of generosity in their lifetime. Buddhist generosity is not about how often, how much. It's about the state of mind. Now, here's something to think about. It's quite curious. The reason we're generous is in one way, of course, because there's a need around us. Somebody needs something, you've got it, you give it. That's natural. But in the longer term, the reason we are practicing generosity is to remove attachment from our mind. That's the whole point. There's always going to be so much need and poverty in the world. This is what the Buddha said, that no bodhisattva's generosity, even the greatest of bodhisattvas, is going to remove poverty from the world. You cannot say, now I've 100% practiced generosity because there's not a bit of poverty left. It's never going to happen. In the long term, the reason we are practicing as Buddhists generosity is to get rid of ego. Ego, when you look closely at the root of it all, is clinging. It's quite graphic. Clinging, hanging on to stuff, hanging on to fixed ideas, hanging on to image, hanging on this is ego. It's afraid. It's crumpled up in a small space. It's in a prison. It's called bondage. Generosity is letting go. The walls of that self-constructed prison of ego are destroyed by generosity. So in the long term, I said it's curious because, as bodhisattvas, we're concerned for suffering. We want to help beings. You might think the main reason for giving is because there's a need. That's there. But the main reason for giving is to get rid of attachment. As Saraha says, when there is no graha, this clinging, that's it. That's what all our Buddhist path is about. This going from the tightness to the total generosity, where everything you are, every moment of the day is totally given to everybody. We have a long way to go. And that's why we're kind of masochistic Buddhists. There's this strange pleasure. Because if you practice a Buddhist path, and at one point I do want to talk about this way our Dharma practice catalyzes life. So life becomes interesting. And life will present you with what most people will call challenges. Of course, as bodhisattvas, we call them gifts. They're the gifts that enable us to give. Funny process. Our Dharma practice magnetizes life to make things happen in such a way that this is challenged, and we have an opportunity for this giving, and we'll find our limits. That's normal. We are beings in samsara on a path. We certainly have limits, but we will start to see how those limits are pushed, and we get a new level of challenge. It's like you've gone from bronze Buddhist. Now you can go up to silver Buddhist if you can manage to deal with that situation in a way which is generous and not self-clinging. So the definition, generosity means giving, but giving with an unattached mind. So that, for instance, somebody who gives, we'll see later, for their reputation, to be seen as a philanthropist, that's not Buddhist generosity. If they're giving to inflate ego, that does not qualify as generosity. Whereas somebody could just pass a biscuit with an unattached mind, and that's generosity. So it's nothing to do with how much. And there, you really do need to think. It might take you a few decades to work it out, what's going on. Because look around, you will see rich people. Now, if all the rich people looked like they were enjoying the fruits of a generous mind, and they were all so kind, and it's like what we read about the Deva realms. How did they become Devas? Because they were so generous and so peaceful of being and so on. But we see people who are wealthy, and it looks like they're nasty pieces of work. And we see people who are so kind and generous, but they're suffering from poverty. Karma is very complicated, and it plays out over many lifetimes. It's not obvious. It's not obvious one bit. It's a lot to reflect on. But when we're looking at generosity is the motor force of both external wealth and internal satisfaction, then this is where we need to explore what's going on in the living moment of being generous. You are giving, but what is the heart that is giving? Is it attached, unattached? Is it attached to ego and self-benefit and self-image, or not? There's resentful giving, where either in life, or like for instance, being a parent, children are demanding. There's so much that has to be done. There's not much choice. They're a responsibility until they are free. So that can really be felt to be impinging on personal freedom. Not to mention personal wealth. It impinges a lot, I think, bringing up children on personal wealth. So there is the giving an education, giving food, giving everything. Parents give children. But the question for Buddhist generosity is it being done with an unattached mind? And then to speak more practically, it's not attached or unattached, it's a question of degree. Are you less attached to your own space, your own freedom, your own wealth, your own image, in this case to the children or to society and so on? Are you less attached, getting more and more attached, or more and more free? Is it getting tighter and tighter so that you feel that grip on yourself like a vice, like a prison, bondage? Or is it getting freer and freer, even if the circumstances are more and more demanding, I think is the word, demand. So that's the definition. When we say essential character in these texts, it means definition. And then most importantly, you need to know this. There are three aspects to the next part, different aspects to Buddhist generosity. We can give stuff, which is what most people think of as generosity. I don't know what you thought of at the beginning in our reflection. We can give stuff. We can give, in English, you would say, of ourselves. We give our time, our support, our friendship. We listen on the telephone when somebody's got a problem, and so on and so on. We give of ourselves, not stuff, ourselves and our time and our energy. That's the second sort. And the third is the gift of Dharma, whereby, if we can, and when we can, we give the Buddha's teaching. It says the first two bring well-being to others in this life. We can help them materially, we can help them emotionally. The gift of Dharma helps them in this life, but in particular helps them prepare future lives. So there's a much longer term benefit, and it's why the gift of Dharma is the best gift. If it's well done, the gift of Dharma, as I was saying earlier on, teacher, student listening. I'm only a teacher if you learn. But if you do learn and take it in and then, like the soup, expand it so it becomes real for you, then the gift of Dharma from me to you will help your future lives. I really hope so. I want to meet all you people again and again, life after life, on the up, in amazing circumstances. And I want the joy of seeing you all flourishing. And then the joy of role switching, where you're my teacher and I'm your disciple. And we just don't know. We just don't know, but on the up, all the way until we're out. Now we look at part 4 of the 7, the essential characteristics. That's very straightforward. I can go through it, but I don't have much to add to what's written. First, we start with material generosity. There's the proper kind and the improper kind. We start with the improper because Dharma generally needs to get rid of what harms first and foremost. That's our priority, is to stop the hurt. And so we deal with that first. 4 things: giving with the wrong motivation, giving the wrong things, giving to an inappropriate receiver, and giving in an inappropriate way. First one, we go down into the details. What is an improper motivation behind Buddhist generosity? It can be 2 sorts, either wrong motivation or a lesser motivation. A wrong motivation is that we're giving something, but we're giving it in order to cause harm, or in order to be well seen, to gain fame for ourselves, or because we're in competition. Can Bill Gates give the most, or can, what's his name? Forgotten his name. The very rich one who bought Twitter. Can he give the most? Musk. Yeah. That's improper motivation from a Buddhist point of view. That's wrong motivation. That will not produce good karma of generosity. Even though you're giving, even though you might be giving lots and lots and lots, and even though people may be benefiting, this is where we need to think. You're creating benefit, but the main reason we are giving is to remove attachment from our mind. And if we're just inflating the ego more and more, then that certainly is not making good karma, is not right motivation. The lesser motivation means we are giving with some understanding of karma, cause and effect, but basically we're afraid of being poor in future lives. And so that's not a wrong motivation, it's a good motivation, but it's not the best. It's a lesser good motivation. It's a good motivation that you realize the power of karma and you want to not be poor in future lives, or to feel poor, incomplete inside, but we do it for that reason. It's not wrong. It's right, but it's not the best. So it says if we're a bodhisattva, we give up those two. So, and then number 2, that was motivation, the gifts. It says, even if you're asked, you don't give improper gifts, such as poison, fire, weapons, if they will bring harm to the person requesting them or to others. Now, okay, we've got straightforward questions here. These days, in our complicated, interconnected world, the ethical implications of many things become so difficult. And, we shouldn't give if it's going to bring harm. So where do people give, for instance, when they want to be a good, kind human being? Maybe you give to charitable organizations, but then some of them, so little trickles through in the end. So many people cream off the money in between. And then sometimes you give to some countries and then the money is used to buy arms, to fight military battles. Ethical giving these days is a complicated thing when you want to give. When on a more personal level, there's a homeless person on the street and you give them money and because they're a familiar homeless person, they're going to buy alcohol with it. Some people say, well, you shouldn't do that because alcohol, they're just destroying themselves. But if you know homeless people and you know the difference a bottle of wine can make, because it enables you to sleep, it makes you warm when it's cold, it helps you forget the problems. I'm not saying it's good or bad. There's probably a vague area that's quite comfortable where you'd never go and give a bottle of whiskey to a homeless person, but you give them the money knowing they're going to buy some cheap spirit with it. It's weird. Anyway, I just want to say the ethics are complicated, but we shouldn't give something if it will cause harm. Or like in Brussels, city of Brussels, there's one place I used to go to a lot. There's a whole network of mainly Romanian beggars on the street. Now they're shipped in, they're held in slavery, they're exploited. So they say you shouldn't give to those people because you're just keeping the whole system going. The more those people get money, the more they're going to kidnap people or get people coming under false pretenses from Romania to Brussels, have them begging, holding a baby on the street and so on. And so you're feeding a system. It's better not to give. And I remember Akon Rinpoche in Brussels, he said, this is a real conundrum. He said, for me, my whole training is if somebody puts out their hand and asks, and I've got it in my pocket, I give. It's as simple as that, what they do with it afterwards. He said, but when you kind of know the moral complexity that's behind it, then it's not straightforward. But generally, the guideline is you don't have to give, or it's not a good thing to give when you know that it's going to be a weapon or a trap for an animal or whatever it is that's going to cause damage. It says you shouldn't give away your parents or use them for surety. Now, this obviously happened in the past when people needed to borrow money. I don't quite know what that meant, but anyway, it says there were moments of this. And then improper gift, this is much more relevant, maybe. If you have a lot, you shouldn't give little. Of course, whatever you give, there's the benefit in that to the person you give it to. Sure. But the reason we are practicing generosity, first and foremost, is to get rid of our clinging and our fear. So if we give little, we can pat ourselves on the back and say, I gave. We can even wear a rubber band around our wrist, say, I gave. We feed the ego, but we could have given much more or given in so many more different circumstances. So that's the actual gifts. The receivers, it says there are inappropriate receivers. Now, if you're the sort of person who has contact with what for most humans are invisible, with spirits and ghosts, then it says some spirits and ghosts will want you, they will want your body in one way or another. In all sorts of ways, this happens. Either they want your whole body, or they will ask you for a bit of your body, or they'll want sexual favors. It can be many things. So it says, even though they ask and you have, and you might think, I'm a bodhisattva, I should really give, then you shouldn't, because it says they're mad, or they're temporarily deranged, their need is not real, they are irresponsible, and their words are nonsense. Back in the human realm, it says it is not generosity to give food and drink to those who are well satiated. So if people have plenty, it's not generosity to just give them even more. Number 4, very important, Akon Rinpoche told us again and again about this, especially in humanitarian work. The improper way of giving then is to give angrily, to give with contempt, to give with a disturbed mind. So if it's kind of, take that and get lost, or we are looking down on a beggar or somebody who's asking, feeling haughty, this is what we're trying to get away from, feeling better than others, arrogance, ego. And then I, the wonderful giver, gave you, the poor person. It's a whole dualistic, not good thing. You shouldn't give in a way which disheartens somebody, makes them feel cheap, miserable, makes them feel dependent. This goes a long way. When we give not just stuff, but emotions, the way we give shouldn't make somebody feel weaker. shouldn't make them feel threatened or shouldn't make them feel scorned. So then the proper things to give. Now we move on to the positive side. What should we give? Everything up to and including your body. If the circumstances are right, then it goes on to say they probably won't be right until you're a very advanced bodhisattva. So don't think if somebody asks for my body, I need to give it to them. But then there are stories of those who've got to a point. The most wonderful story of in a previous life, Buddha Shakyamuni at one point came across a tigress, and she was starving to death, and she'd given birth to cubs, and she didn't have any milk. The cubs were dying, so there were altogether, I think, 4 cubs, one mother. And Bodhisattva was so moved to help that he started scraping his own arm to make it bleed so that the tigress could lick, because she couldn't get up, very weak. But he was a bodhisattva with such nice presence. The tigress, even though she was hungry, didn't want to lick the blood. And so he just made it more, and he somehow convinced her to start eating. And now the reason he did that, even though he could have had many more years as a good bodhisattva, he thought, in all my lives, I've never had such a wonderful opportunity to practice non-attachment to being in this world, to being a human. He's a bodhisattva. He knew I'll get more and more lives. And so in the end, she ate him. She ate him, and the cubs got fed. Now what happened to that tigress and the cubs is very secondary. What it meant is that Bodhisattva had an amazing opportunity to practice generosity. But it says, until you get to the point where you can let go of your body. Now, these days, what have we got? Very interesting situation with organ donation after you're dead. There's no time today, but do we just sign the paper and do it? Do we know about consciousness after death and how you can be aware of them taking your organs and be confused and feel very, very angry and upset, and how that would affect the rest of your bardo? It's complicated. I can't give you an answer, especially in just a minute, but to show that these general teachings, once we start to think about them and very real present day circumstances, then this is why after the paramita of generosity, we need the paramita of ethics and right conduct. So giving away one's body. Then you can give away anything you've got if it's of use and if your motivation's right. The receiver, this is important. We have generally, of course, anyone who needs, but there are 4 types of being that we need to be that we should make offerings to. We should practice generosity to, very specially. The first are those, it says, designated by their qualities. And gurus, teachers, and then generally everything that is Dharma, Dharma centers, Dharma organizations, printing texts, building stupas, things like that, because those have the quality of helping many, many beings. Secondly, those particularly designated by the benefit they've given us. Now, this is very especially parents. And I know Akon Rinpoche, even though it costs people a lot in terms of their career or even their ability to practice formal Dharma, he would always encourage people to care for their parents whenever it was possible and in the best possible way. So the parents, then those who brought us benefit in this life. Then third, those designated by their suffering. So of course the sick, the poor, the weak, the unprotected, which are what we often think of as we definitely need to help those who are suffering that much, of course. And then those particularly designated by the harm they've done us. So we need to be generous, however that can be accomplished, to those who have harmed us. So again, these days, one example, inheritance, brothers, sisters, money, property, nasty stories, people turning against each other. What is fair, what is unfair, what will a Buddhist do? No simple answer. It depends how far you are, how much of a bodhisattva you are, and so on. But people who've harmed us, we need to benefit them, because the ego mind wants them to hurt. The bodhisattva mind wants them to benefit. And the bodhisattva mind, any Buddhist mind, wants to put an end to the karma that made them hurt you and could make you hurt them back in return, and it never ends. How to put a stop to the flow of harm, karma, generosity. And then the way the gift is given, so important, with the very best motivation and done in the best way. It says a bodhisattva should give joyfully, with respect, personally, at the right time, and without harming others. So that's a whole teaching in one sentence. It's explained in your notes, very straightforward. Joyfully means in the 3 moments before you give, your intention, while you're doing it, and then afterwards when you're looking back on what happened. It should be done. Joyfully means willingly, happily, approvingly, not resentfully. So when that's there, then we have good karma, we have right generosity. With respect means with respect for the person you're giving it to. This goes deeper and deeper. Bodhisattvas think of my former mother, my former parents, former best friend. With deeper teachings, we resonate with the Buddha nature inside the other person. And we respect everyone because inside they are Buddha. And if we practice Vajrayana, we see everyone as Guru. Every gift is an offering to Guru, and so on. With respect. Personally means whenever you can, you do it yourself. If you entrust the giving to somebody else, they might mess up. They might do it with a weak mind, bad mind. They might not do it correctly. So whenever we can, we do it ourselves. And we make an excellent job of it. And then it says, without harming others, means without causing hardship in one's entourage or for those who actually possess the goods. So we don't give. Akon Rinpoche was very meticulous about this. He said, look, it may just be a paperclip in Samiling's office, but it's not your paperclip to give. So you may feel, what's the big deal? He said, but if you think Buddhist ethics that all the time we only want to give what is beneficial, then if you've just robbed Samiling of one paperclip, you have the karma of one paperclip robbery with ignorant intention. But it says, in particular, in a family, if one person in the family, person who owns the goods, the father maybe, wants to give them, but this will cause suffering for the wife or the children. It says if it will bring tears to the eyes of those around you, then that is not the right way of giving. So all that's mainly about material generosity. And I think, seeing what the time is, we need to stop there for today. I had hoped to get through these basics today, but obviously I didn't. And we can carry on next week. So let's dedicate anything that was good in this start of our exploration of generosity that's dedicated to everyone. And in particular, as we've seen in those 4 fields, let's dedicate the goodness to the long life and unimpeded teaching of our Dharma teachers. Let's dedicate it to our parents, alive or dead, wherever they are now, in gratitude for their ongoing journey. Let's dedicate it to all the poor and the needy, that the spirit of generosity in this world will make things better and better and grow and grow. And let's dedicate it to those in particular who have harmed us and damaged our life. Sonam dietam che zikpane, topne nye pedranam pamchene, je gana che palap trukpaye, zipe sole, drowa drowaresho, janchup semcho rinpoche, maje panam jejo jik, jepa nyampa me padam, kongne, kongdo, galwaresho. Thank you. So now it's over to you if you've got any comments or questions.
Hi, Ken. The second aspect is the essential character. It says that generosity means giving with an unattached mind. And I think that's very important, because often people give something, say they might give me, it could be a sweater, it could be a packet of biscuits, could be a Buddha Rupa or anything. But then if I then give that packet of biscuits to somebody else, the person who gave it to me sort of feels aggrieved that, you know, that they didn't give it with an unattached mind. They still sort of feel ownership of it. So
that's
I think
very
that's
important. Yeah.
I think that's something that we have to watch ourselves, that if we give something, then we don't sort of keep a long arm hold of it.
Yeah.
In our mind.
Yeah, exactly. That's in this, we're coming to it. And it's in that phrase, with an unattached mind. And so, of course, we're doing less and less attachment with those little invisible strings. And I remember somebody gave quite a big tonka, Tibetan painting to Akon Rinpoche via me, because they couldn't get to him personally. And in the end, I think that they said, well, you take it to him. But then every time that person came back to Samiling, they wanted to know, where's the tonka? Once they said, has he got it hanging in his room? Is he looking at it all the time to think, oh, so-and-so offered this to me? Now, the truth of the matter was that actually it was a tonka from another lineage. And I think he probably gave it away to somebody who came to see him for advice from that lineage, probably within days or weeks. But I couldn't tell the person, because I knew exactly what you said and what you're saying. But I gave it to him. They wanted him to be having that tonka and to knowing, be remembering the person because of it. And he was like many people. And I remember even before being a Buddhist, reading about some very great Hindu masters like Ramana Maharshi and others, who whatever they were given in the daytime, they'd made sure they'd given it away by the evening. They didn't want anything, and made sure the only way was to just give it away in the same day. Yeah, no strings attached. Thank you. Thank you.
Ken, giving food. In our family, it's become quite fashionable now at Christmas and for birthdays to give food, also good quality biological food. Of course, for example, yesterday there was my cousin's birthday and she is well saturated. And I gave her some tea, organic tea, and I gave her also some vegetarian kind of granules to make a nice soup. How about these kind of things for birthdays and Christmas? Can you mention on that, talk about that?
Yeah, this is why generosity needs right conduct, and like any of these teachings, that's what I was saying at the beginning. Okay, you've got the teachings there. You've got them for this course. We've got 14 pages of Gampopa as a backup. Most of it's in there, but that's only a beginning, because real life situations are just not straightforward. There's no textbook. So it's, you could say it's not generosity to give to somebody who is satiated, but if we can bring happiness to somebody and a stronger connection with ourselves for future lives, a positive connection where they'll have some kind of link with us that will come through as a Dharma link in other lives, then my own opinion is that you wouldn't say, oh, that person's already eaten enough, I'm not going to give any more, because if they feel that as kindness, if they think, oh, your Buddhists are kind, whereas if they think, Buddhists won't give me a third cup of tea because they think I'm satiated and they're weird people, you can only tell in the moment, in the circumstances. Use your best judgment. And it's like the thing with giving money to beggars who are going to buy alcohol. There's the things that it says in the book, but you have to make your own assessment in the long term, what is really kind here. And then also we've got this secondary aspect these days, that we don't live in a Buddhist culture. And if people know us to be Buddhist, like it or not, they are going to be judging Buddhism by what we do and the way we do it. And I think that's quite important. In the 80 qualities of a bodhisattva, one of them that one develops, it's called a sense of dignity. And it's about how we act in public, and about authenticity, and about how what might seem to us to be authenticity would need to take second place to dignity if by acting in a certain way, we can maintain respect for the Buddha and the Buddha's teachings, because somehow we represent that in other people's minds. There again, we get into a not simple, complicated area about the conduct of Buddhist teachers and so on. But I think it is something to be aware of, because you hear sometimes people will trash a religion, a faith, a system, because of just some one thing that happened with a Buddhist, a Christian, a Muslim, or whatever it was. So I'd say just we have to use our best judgment. I don't know if that's helpful, Regina, but anyway.
Yes,
Ken,
thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I think it's very helpful that you've outlined some of these kind of ethical and issues for us to consider, because I find it quite hard, the issue of when people are on the streets and homeless and what goes with that. And one of the ethical dilemmas that I pose every time is, yes, they may be going to buy alcohol, but maybe this time they won't. And maybe this time it might actually be the start of some sense of self-worth that actually starts helping them to, or sets the energy in motion to help them change their life eventually. And I think it's just so difficult. We basically just don't know. We don't know what the person's going to do with that gift. We don't know if they're going to use it for their own positive or their own negative purposes. And sometimes I feel, well, who am I to be the judge of that, to withhold or to give based on that potential of what they will do with it?
And that last part is very, very important, because when we get the definition is to give with an unattached mind, then what we're going to see, I hope next week, because I don't live up to my own expectations of what I'm going to deliver in each talk, but anyway, when we look at how a bodhisattva really gives, like prayerfully and so on, then the whole point is to let go of our attachment, fixed ideas, in this case of the other person, what they're going to do with it, our own judgment, our own projections onto other people. That's why Akon Rinpoche said, if somebody's got their hand out and they ask, and I'm a bodhisattva, then I give. If I've got it, I give. Because he wanted, as far as I could understand, to sweep away from his mind. When we come to, well, it's not here, but in the Six Paramitas teaching, we get the word dana, which is the Indo-European root for the word like donation, don in French and so on. Somehow, the Tibetan scholars find an etymology there I've not found in Indian sources, but they say the root meaning of dan, the verb, is to sweep away. Sweep away. It's like a sense of clearing the table. So we practice generosity to sweep away ego, clinging, fear, narrow-mindedness. And so that projection onto other people is part of it. And we need to do that wisely by, mindful awareness of our own projections. So in the circumstances, I found this because it was a daily thing in Brussels, and I'd go out every day, lots and lots of beggars, always the same situation. And I could feel my own projections with each beggar are different. There's the mother holding the baby, and all sorts of thoughts. You shouldn't be bringing a baby onto a street like that, and so on. There was one who had the most angelic smile, a very, very, very beautiful woman, and but somehow feeling very poor. All of these projections. I mean, you don't know the person at all. I mean, I know people I've known for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and I still don't know them one bit. So one person you pass in the street and you just get a visual like this or whatever it is. How can you know? So when we practice dana, sweeping away, part of it is sweeping away preconceptions. And like in Buddha's lifetime, he was criticized because he was given a very wealthy jewel. And people were curious, how is he going to cash this in? Is he going to feed 1,000 poor people or what? And he gave it to a local Raja, somebody who was a monarch. And he got criticism for that. And people asked, why did you do that when you could have helped so many poor people? And he said, yeah, I could have helped poor people temporarily. But then, with their karma, in a month's time or a week's time, they're going to be hungry again. They're going to be poor again. That king is a victim of greed. And by the way I gave and the connection between us, this would actually start as the beginning of the end of that horrid greed in the king's mind. Because something so beautiful and so rare and precious was given to him. Normally, it wouldn't put an end to his greed if somebody else gave it. He said, but when I give it, because of the connection, he's sowing a seed that will. So he explained projections are everywhere, and part of generosity for the Bodhisattva, and particularly when we come to Vajrayana, it's just it's like cutting through so much stuff inside ourselves. It's no longer about material stuff out there. It's about deep, deep, irreversible benefit to ourselves.
I'd like to add something about the meeting homeless people on the street, because it's not only a question of, do I give them some money or do I not give them some money? And this is the more, perhaps a harder thing to do. I have a Tibetan friend who works a lot of her time with homeless people and the mentally ill. And whenever she meets homeless people in the street, and where she lives, there's a lot, I've been with her, and she might give them money or she might not, but she gives them her time. She stops, she talks with them, sometimes she sings for them, sometimes she dances with them in the street, and to try and give them some lift their self-esteem. And I think ultimately, I personally, I find that hard to do. But I can see that ultimately that's probably much better or much more beneficial than giving them $3 or $10 or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, no, totally agree. And I think the moment of contact that you do have when you give is very, very special, very important.
Ken, I put in the chat, I would really value a discussion with you, in one of these groups about the issue of organ donation.
Okay.
Sometime. It would be very, very helpful for me.
Okay, let's try and put that in next week, because I think it's useful for lots of people.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I think we've come to the end of today, so I wish you all a very, very good week. We did the dedication, so just see you in a week's time, and lovely to be back.
Thank you, Ken.
Okay, bye-bye now.
Thank you,
Have a
Ken.
good week, everyone.
Thank you, Ken. Bye.
Thanks, Ken.
Thank you,
Lovely.
Ken.
Thank you,
Nice to
Ken.
see everybody.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ken.
everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Right.